Hi, I'm Sue.
I'm Julia.
And welcome to episode 15 of Sticks and Stones. On today's episode, our DIY project will be a reversible tote. We'll get to see the dinosaur lizard train car sweater that Julia finished for Ian. And Sue brings us up to speed on some quick ways to make some jewelry. Join us! Action!
Okay. So, we're doing a quickie today just to get things going again, and we wanted to show you in person the crazy sweater, birthday sweater that I made for this one. How old did you turn? That's right. So let me lift him up and I will show you.
What's awesome about cameras is you can see yourself right out there.
You see it? Now this sweater, because he wanted thousands of things, what I did is I made him a pocket to put his thousands of things in, and
like that.
Like that car. And then what can you do with that car?
Play with it.
Drive it on his belly. So he has a road built in. This is the axle pattern from Petite Pearls, and I really like it. It was easy. It was fun.
You can get down there, buddy.
So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's do
There you go, young Padawan. Go. Fight your force. Go downstairs.
Occasionally you'll get to see a glimpse of our real life, and here it is. So this is what we've been doing around here.
All right, so
What else have you been doing?
hi, I've been fighting off Darth Vader and his
I'll be right
forces.
back. Go ahead and tell them what you've been doing.
I've been making bibs again because lots of babies. Always babies, they keep coming, and so I've been making a bunch of bibs for people. And I have all of these bibs cut out that I need to sew for all different people. So that's one of the things I've been working on. The other thing I did is I made some earrings. I made these earrings. I made these earrings. Welcome back.
Sorry for that.
So I was telling the folks at home that I made earrings, and what I wanted people to take away from this is I went out and I bought these earrings, and actually this is what they originally looked like, which I would never in a million years.
Those are crazy.
And if I wore them, they touch my shoulders and they're really, really heavy. But I saw these and I love the texture and the color, and so I bought them and I took them apart. And I'm gonna make this. I could either just do it like that as a necklace,
That could be neat.
or I could take like the individual pieces. This is actually even just one earring, so I have a whole other earring
Oh, wow.
to play with. And I got them at the Deb shop. You know, it's like a junior shop
Yes.
at the mall. I happened to walk in, and so I got those earrings. I got these, which were originally this long, and I took them apart. They were buy one get one half off, so I probably spent about $12 or $13 on
Yeah,
earrings.
you got a lot of stuff.
And I'll probably end up with like 6 or 7 pieces.
Yeah, very good.
So you don't have to go to the craft store to get stuff. You can go to a department store, find stuff, and take it apart and
We do.
repurpose.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So what have you been doing besides
Wrangling Jedi. No, I wanted to show you guys. He was lucky enough to be here today, so I wanted to show you in person how nicely the sweater turned out. And he
Did
really,
it look great on him?
He really loves it. It's been a lot of fun. So again, that's Axel from Petite Pearls, and it was done with Debbie Bliss Cashmerino DK. But I've also been doing. This is our square along. Don't forget to sign up for the square
Yes,
along.
I'm sure. I've downloaded the pattern and it's somewhere on my needle.
This is the Trinity Stitch
Ooh, I like
square.
that.
That's the back, actually. So it's kind of cool. You could do it front or back. I got the pleasure of seeing one of the other participants, her Afghan. She's got 3 squares on it now. It is absolutely beautiful.
Oh, great!
Yeah, I won't mention names, but I'm hoping she posts a picture so we can all...
Do I know her?
You do. She knows her, but it
Does
is
her
just...
name rhyme with pledge?
It does. Never mind that. I guess we are mentioning names and naming
No,
stuff.
nobody
but-
will guess what it is.
They're turning out really nice. So I hope yours is also turning out as well. And just be sure, though, for this month to be involved in the drawing, you must finish.
I better get started. I mean, finish.
And this was our last month's prize. So Kisa Valkyrie was our winner, and I've put it on the blog, but I haven't heard from her yet. So as soon as I hear about when and how to get this to you, this will be yours. A washcloth. And then just real quick, my other couple projects. I made a ghosty hat,
Nice.
plain Jane vanilla pattern for Halloween for one of the kiddos.
Fun.
And this is birthday number 2 of the fall season. This is a skirt
Ooh,
for
I really like that.
my almost 7-year-old. It's nutso. It's like a cheerleading skirt. You spread it out and all those colors show up.
Oh, I like the other side.
And that's kind of crazy too. But she picked out all the colors herself,
I like it.
and ultimately I'll block it so it will flare a little bit more. And
That's
I'm
fun.
about halfway. So I'm always poking you with
God.
needles.
I had to get that lightsaber back here to defend myself.
So that's the second one, and I'll put the name of it because I can't. Oh, it's Hey Mickey. That's the name of the pattern
Okay.
from. You can find that. It's a free pattern too. And finally, I'm making another scarf because I know I can't ever stick with one pattern for very long. It's actually a shawl. This
that
is
looks
called
really pretty.
the Orchid Thief, and it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love it.
That is really beautiful, and it's
that's the
beautiful
front.
color.
This is made with Malabrigo lace. You can kind of see if you put it up against me.
It's really pretty.
The pattern, and I'm about.
No one's gonna get hurt today.
I got another 2-3 repeats to go with this, and then I have to block it, so it'll be quite a bit bigger by the time I'm done. But I'm loving this.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
So that's what I've been doing.
For today's DIY project, we're going to be doing a reversible tote. This is a very simple project for a beginning sewer. You need a few supplies. You need obviously a sewing machine. You need an ironing board and an iron, a scissors, preferably a fabric scissors, a seamstress tape or a ruler, some pins, and whatever fabric you're working with. When I create a tote, I don't have a pattern. I make it whatever size I think it should be. So for this particular tote, it's for a little girl and it's a library bag. So I thought Make Way for Ducklings is a classic, and it's about as big as a kid is going to carry in a tote. So I made sure that the book will fit both ways, and we're going to have about an inch seam allowance on either side. So this tote is going to be, about this big when we're done. And so that's really how I make my measurements for when I make a tote. I'm not very good at following patterns, but I will tell you that this fabric is 17.5 by 15, which actually ends up being kind of a standard size. It's usually in the 18 to 20 for an adult or something like that when I end up making the totes. The other thing I did with this fabric is I'm using a fabric that doesn't have an up and a down. So when I created my fabric, although the tote, the one side is 15 by 17, the piece itself is twice as long because I just folded it in half, and then I have one less seam to sew down here. So if you're beginning, use a fabric that doesn't have an up and a down, like this fabric. If you took this and folded it in half, this side would be right side up and all of these would be upside down. Okay, so I have my 2 pieces of fabric, and one's going to be the inside, one's going to be the outside, although it is reversible. And like I said, the total piece of fabric is 30 by 17.5. So that's going to be our pieces for the main part of the tote. To begin our sewing though, we're going to work on the pocket and the straps first. So the pocket, I usually like to have one pocket in my tote just to throw keys or something in. The easiest way to make a pocket is to take 2 pieces of fabric, put them right sides together. You should always iron your fabric. The flatter it is, the easier it is to work with, and the less mistakes you make when you're cutting and when you're sewing. This pocket, these pieces of fabric are about 8 1/4 by almost 7, about 6 3/4. And again, what's great about this tote is you can use any size fabric. So these I took out of my scrap fabric stash, and this is the size the pocket's going to be. I'm going to pin it. Like I said, you always want to have your right sides together. I'm going to pin this together. Just put a few pins in here, and I'm going to set it aside for when we get to our sewing portion. While we're up here at the ironing board, I'm also going to work on the handles, and I'm going to make one long handle and cut it in half, and then sew that in. Because these handles I don't want to make them too long because it's for a little kid. So I'm starting with a piece of fabric that's about 6 inches by about 31 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first fold it in half and press it. Pressing makes sewing so much easier. If I tried to sew this without pressing, I could do it, but it just takes a lot more effort. So I'm going to press that down. So now the fabric's in half. I'm going to open it back up, and I'm going to bring the edge of the fabric up to where the crease is where I ironed it. This is just one way to make straps. There's a couple different ways to make straps. This one I find the easiest. Now I'm going to bring the other side in to the crease. And iron that. Make a nice crease there. And now I'm going to fold the whole thing in half and iron it once more. Now my ragged edges are inside of the strap. So all I have to do is put one seam here for my handles. You can also, if you want, for stylistically, you can put another seam here so it looks even. But if you use the same color as the strap, then you won't see it and you only have to put one seam. So I'm going to put a couple of pins in here to hold this in place. Some people use masking tape when they're doing it. Some people don't pin at all. For this, it could pop open, so I'm going to pin it. Some people pin in this direction, perpendicular to where you're working. Some people do it parallel and take the pins out as they sew. I like the parallel and taking the pins out as you sew. I was taught this way, and that you sew right over the pin, but then sometimes, depending on how the needle goes, it hits the pin and it'll break your needle. So now that we have a few pieces ready for sewing, we're going to head on over to the sewing machine and sew those. So now I'm about to sew the strap. Now if I wanted to not be able to see the thread, I would use a red thread and bobbin like this. But I decided as a design element instead, I'm going to use a blue color that picks up the blue that's in these fabrics. And I think that'll look cute. And I mean, it's very subtle. Nobody's going to see your blue fabric, but it'll give it some punch, because otherwise these are pretty bland. And so what you're going to do is you're just going to sew down the length of this side where the two folds come together. Put down your presser foot, put your needle in the fabric, go forward a few stitches, backwards a few stitches to lock it, and then go forward. And really, when you're sewing straight like this, and every single part of this project is sewing in a straight line, you just need to guide it. You don't need to push it, you don't need to pull it. You just need to guide it along. And it's pretty simple. Because I'm using this blue thread as a design element, I'm going to sew another line on this other side when I'm finished here. And it's not necessary, although it does help keep them very, very flat. Because this tote is completely washable, when you wash it, it will stay flat when you dry it. And something to keep in mind as well when you're sewing is if you plan for something to be washable, it's a really good idea to wash your fabrics before you start. Wash them on hot if you can, and dry them on high. Some fabrics will shrink a little bit, especially if they're cotton, and that way you don't have shrinkage and pullage on the seams when you wash it at another time. So now I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. Put my presser foot down, put my needle in, go forward a few stitches, head backwards, and then sew the whole length of this. And as you probably saw, when you get to the end, you go forward and backward again. Alright, so now we're going to sew the pocket. And we have our two pieces of fabric for our pocket, and we have our right sides together. I pinned it, and now I'm going to sew it only on 3 sides, and I'm going to leave the 4th side open. That way we can turn it inside out when we're finished. So forward a little, going backwards, and heading all the way around. When you get to the corner, you you can do one of two things. You can turn it, and whenever you turn, you make sure that your needle is in your fabric. Pick up your presser foot and turn it. Otherwise, if your needle's not in when you turn it, you can move the fabric and it'll end up in a different spot. Or you can sew off the end and then sew another seam off the end in the other direction and sew a third seam. For this particular project, it doesn't really matter one way or another. I like to sew off the end. I think you get a little bit straighter corners, and you can cut the corners off then at an angle. So I'm going to cut that one off, and we're going to keep going here. I also like to line up my presser foot with the edge of the fabric. I find it easier to keep it in line, and so when I start, then I know it's exactly in that spot. So you go forward and backward to lock the seam in, head down the other side. Always putting your presser foot back in the fabric whenever you're messing with the fabric so it doesn't get out of line. And off to the edge. And go forward and backwards, and off the side. If you trim your threads as you go, you don't have to do a lot of trimming at the end. And here we go, finishing up this last side. And now I'm going to trim this thread and trim my first thread. And what we're going to do next is we're just going to turn this inside out. So I turned my pocket inside out, and one of the ways you can push out the corners is to use a hemostat, which is, you know, those things that they use at the hospital that are a locking hemostat, and they put it on IV lines, and they're great for sewing. They're great for pulling out pieces, or you can use it to gently push in the corner. If you have something that's too pointy, it will point right through the fabric. So a hemostat works well to push out the corners. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew this flat. Sew it. I'm going to press it flat. And then I'm going to take the top seam here and I'm going to push it inside like this. And I'm going to measure it to make sure it's even pretty much across. So it's 5.5. It's a little less than 5.5, so I can pull this out a little bit. And then I'm going to press that. And then I'm going to trim this little thread here. I'm going to press that. So now I have my pocket, my lined pocket. So now we're going to tack our pocket onto our fabric. And so this is one of my pieces, my inside of my tote, and it's folded in half. And so the straps are going to be up here. So I'm going to take the pocket. The part that was open here, I'm going to put at the bottom. And then you can figure out where you want it. Do you want it up near the top? Do you want it down near the bottom? You want it in the center? Just keeping in mind that up here you're going to need a seam allowance for when you sew this part with the other part of the tote. And so I'm going to put mine about in the middle. And I'm just going to pin it on. You want to pin it only through one layer of your fabric. And then after I pin it, the three sides that I put the pins on here are the three sides that we're going to be sewing. So you're going to have the pocket open here at the top to slide something in, and you're going to just sew on these three sides. And down here where we had the 2 layers of fabric open, as you sew it here, it will close it. So it saves you a step of sewing. Just make sure that you only pin it to this first layer of fabric, not all the way through. So here's my original strap that I sewed, and I sewed the 2 seams on either side, or 1 seam on either side. And I'm just going to cut this in half to make my straps. These are going to be kind of short straps, so they're on your arm. And now I'm going to tack them to this bag. And what you need to do for this is, one, you need to make sure your handles are in the right direction. You don't want to twist them and end up with a bag you can't hold. So hold your 2 ends out, and you're going to tack them to the outside of one of the layers of the bag. And so you can take your ruler and just measure in from the side. I'm going to do 4.5 inches. On this side and 4.5 on this side. And pin those on, and then you're going to just sew the straps on. And you'll see I already did this one, that it ends up like this. And the reason you want it like that is that when you sew the bag together, then the seam will be inside and the handles will be coming out. I'm going to put our right sides together, and I'm going to line it up. My pocket is inside here. Here's where we're going to slip things in. Here's our crease at the bottom. And all we're going to do is line this up and pin it and sew it on each side. And you can leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inch seam allowance depending on how much you want to do. So I'll meet you back here at the sewing machine. I mean the ironing board. I will meet you back here and we'll put it all together. So now that we are finished sewing the sides of our tote, what I'm going to do is I want to add a little more depth to this tote. I could put the whole thing together at this point, and it would be a tote that comes to a point, but I want to add a little bit of depth to the bottom, almost like a grocery bag or a paper bag. And so what I did is I pulled up from the bottom and made a flat bottom like this, and I pressed it. And what you're going to do is you're going to measure in. I'm measuring in about 2 inches on each side, and I'm going to put a pin there so that I know where to sew. And so it's even on both sides. And try not to stick yourself with the pin. And so I'm going to sew just across here. We don't want to grab all this fabric down here. And when you're done, it'll look like this. Here we go. So here's the bottom of my bag, and you can see that it makes it have more of a bottom. Now this is still inside out, and after you sew that, what you're going to do is you're going to cut off the excess fabric over here on either side. Where's the other part of my bag? Here it is. You're going to cut off that excess fabric. And so when you stand the tote up, you will have a flat bottom. And that gives it a little bit more room to put all those library books in. Okay, so we have our 2 bags here. As I said before, this could just be a simple tote, just like that. There's an unfinished seam at the top, but you've got a simple tote here. But what we're going to do is we're going to add this liner, and so we can flip it inside or outside. So what you're going to do is your tote with the straps, you're going to have the print on the right side out. The tote that has the pocket on it, you're going to have it inside out, so the wrong side is facing out. And what you're going to do is take the tote with the straps and put it inside the tote with the pockets. Like this. You want to take these handles and flip them in between these 2 layers so that they're laying down flat inside there. We want to do that with both of our handles. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pin it to sew it. Start at the seams, line up the 2 seams, and you can flatten out each side of the seams. That way it'll have a nicer finish, and it'll sew easy because you'll only be sewing through 4 layers of fabric rather than 8. And then I go over to my other seam over here and match those 2 seams up, open up those little pieces of fabric for my seam allowance, and pin it. And all you're going to do then is go along here and line up these sides like this. Put a little pin in there, and we're going to sew. Now when you sew this, you need to leave a space. You need to leave an opening because you have to turn this whole thing inside out. So you need to leave a little space. So usually what I do is I usually leave a little space I come across here from the seam allowance a little bit, and I leave a space about this big until the handle, or even over here to the handle, so that you can pull the whole tote inside out. So I'm going to sew this right now, and then we'll go from there. Turn it inside out.
It looks great. Turned out really good.
Then make way for ducklings fits.
Yahoo!
Both ways, this way and this way. Yeah, and you can turn it inside out. There's a little pocket, and yeah. So what I ended up doing to finish it off is I top stitched it around the top, which is just I stitched it all the way around. And sometimes there's a little excess fabric because these two pieces are the same size, and so I just kind of pull it together and gather it around the corners here and try and make it real flat there.
Okay.
But basically, you know, all these totes that I've made, I showed this one before. These are all the same pattern. It's just they're different sizes. You know, this one's a little bit wider, and this one has fusible interfacing in it that helps it to stand up. So I think that's about it for us today.
Yeah.
Put it in a bag.
Mama, I couldn't find them, but I did find this. I couldn't find them, but I did find
Let me see.
It's a Star Wars.
I know. Look. That's it for this episode of Sticks and Stones.
Come here. Say hello.